Hello, my name is Jennifer Stabile, and my master's project is titled The Ecology, Behavior, and Conservation Strategies of the Mona Coqui in Puerto Rico. So I would like to start by saying that this presentation is going to be focused on the natural history and breeding ecology of a frog that is found on Mona Island in Puerto Rico. I'm going to start with a brief introduction, and then on to the methods, the results, and then finally the management recommendations. My research question was, what are potential threats to the Mona Coqui and what could be done to conserve this population? I've answered this question by conducting a literature review for management recommendations, as well as by collecting original data from Mona Island. In this particular presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the general behaviors and reproductive strategies of the Mona Coqui and how it's significant to their conservation. I'm also going to focus on how tourism could potentially affect the Mona Coqui populations, and finally, what conservation strategies can be applied to the Mona Coqui. There are 25 species of amphibians that occur in the Puerto Rican archipelago. 19 are native and 6 are introduced. Of those, monensis, or the Mona Coqui, is considered the least known species, being data deficient. Monensis is currently listed as vulnerable by the IUCN due to its restricted range. So although this study also included monensis' known distribution and population data, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on monensis' natural history and reproductive strategies, and then moving into the potential population threats from the impacts of tourism, climate change, and invasive species, and then provide further recommendations on the conservation of monensis. So a little bit about the global amphibian crisis. There are currently over 8,000 known amphibian species, with new species being discovered every year. Despite the rate of new species discovery, amphibian declines are occurring more rapidly than birds or mammals. Roughly 40% of all amphibian species known to science are presumed to be threatened by human impacts. The largest numbers of threatened amphibian species can be found in the tropics, with the highest levels occurring in the Caribbean. Reasons for extinction are not always so clear-cut. Large-scale changes to an ecosystem such as land development, climate change, invasive species, and emerging infectious diseases such as the amphibian chytrid fungus, otherwise known as BD, are known primary causes of declining populations. So, monensis, or the Mona Coqui, is a medium-sized terrestrial frog. They do exhibit sexual dimorphism, where females are a little bit larger than the males, and they are the only amphibian found on Mona Island. They are also endemic to Mona Island, meaning they are found nowhere else in the world. The Mona Coqui are also direct developers, meaning that there is no tadpole stage, so they hatch out as fully formed froglets after developing inside the egg. They also exhibit a pretty unique reproductive behavior where the male and the female frog will actually work together to dig out the nest site for the eggs. You can see that here in these photos. So Mona Island is a part of the Puerto Rican archipelago, and here you can see where it's located in relation to Puerto Rico. Mona is situated roughly 67 kilometers west of Puerto Rico and 59 kilometers east of the Dominican Republic. It's about 12 kilometers long by 5 kilometers wide, with 32 kilometers of shoreline. So Mona Island is a relatively small island, 57 square kilometers. Here you can see it's kidney-shaped. It's located in the Mona Passage, which is in the Caribbean Sea, and it's never been connected to another landmass, which is important for its biogeography. Now, the Mona Passage is a 130-kilometer wide strait. It separates Puerto Rico from Hispaniola, and it connects the Caribbean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. The waters of the Mona Passage can be very unpredictable. They're fast-flowing, they're cold, they're deep, and they're pretty treacherous, specifically for very small watercraft. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the habitat on Mona Island. Most of Mona Island is raised limestone platform, and it's surrounded on all 4 sides by vertical or near vertical cliffs. Mona is considered one of the most cavernous places in the world, with greater than 200 caves of multiple sizes and complexities distributed throughout the island. Mona is considered a subtropical dry forest, where the climate is arid or semi-arid and warm year-round with very little precipitation. The mean annual temperature is 25 degrees Celsius, and Mona's arid climate is mainly due to the very low rainfall, 800 to 950 millimeters, which occurs August through November. The flora of Mona mostly consists of shrubs, cactus, and dwarf trees, and it's important to note that there are no hotels or other accommodations on the island, only 2 areas which allow for primitive camping. Mona Island is designated as a wildlife refuge and critical wildlife area, and it's managed by the Puerto Rican Department of Natural Resources. The Puerto Rico Department of Natural Resources controls the number of visitors on Mona by issuing no more than 100 visitor permits to the island at any given time. And although the number of visitors are limited, there is little oversight of recreational activities once on the island, specifically inside of the caves. The reptile and amphibian species of Mona Island have been of interest to herpetologists for well over a century, and it's also very well known for its endemic wildlife. There are currently 12 species of aquatic and terrestrial reptiles, and there's only 1 amphibian found on Mona, monensis. 90% of terrestrial reptile and amphibian species are endemic to Mona, meaning that they are found nowhere else in the world. So 2 localities and 7 sites were visited 7 times between 2011 and 2019. The 2 localities are Playa Sardinera, which is located on the northwest coast of the island, and Playa Pájaros, which is located on the southeast coast of the island. Playa Sardinera was visited 6 times during the course of this study and is considered the primary field location. It is important to note Playa Pájaros was only surveyed during a single field season in July of 2019. Due to the geology and topography of the island, these are the only 2 locations on Mona Island where a boat is able to dock and researchers can easily access the island. So here's an updated distribution map for monensis, and that's the one at the top. For the purpose of this presentation, I would just like to show you guys where the study sites were. Playa Sardinera is located in the northwest, and Playa Pájaros is located in the southeast. During the field surveys, visual assessments and population counts were performed both during the day and at night at all sites, with the exception of the caves, Cueva Negra and Cueva Caballos, where surveys were only conducted during the day. Monensis were identified by both visual and auditory detection, however, frogs were not included in counts unless visually observed. Observations focused on presence of monensis, and all frogs that were found were counted, sexed, and remember, monensis are sexually dimorphic, and they were measured with digital calipers. And I want to point out that this was all done with a catch and release method. So all frogs were caught by hand using disposable nitrile gloves and then released after the data was collected. Data collected from each site included the number of frogs or population size, the sex ratio, the size of the animal, the life stage, such as adult, subadult, juvenile, any reproductive behaviors, such as if they were in amplexus, which is the way these frogs reproduce, or certain characteristics like gravid or pregnant females and recently hatched froglets. So this study concluded that the caves of Mona Island are potentially important breeding sites for monensis. For example, 93% of all frogs found in Cueva Caballos were newly hatched froglets. And by newly hatched, I mean they probably hatched within 24 to 48 hours of us being there. Now this is really important because the caves of Mona, particularly Cueva Caballos and Cueva Negra, are also highly touristed areas. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time going over amphibian disease on Mona Island, but I would like to note that out of the 36 samples for the amphibian chytrid fungus which were collected in between the years 2006 and 2019, all came back negative for the amphibian chytrid fungus. So after conducting this extensive literature review and upon analyzing the data, I have come up with 4 potential threats for monensis. They include invasive species, disease, climate change, and tourism. So I'd like to start by discussing the invasive species. Islands are particularly vulnerable to invasive species due to endemic species evolving absent of predators and due to most invasive species being ecological generalists, while endemic species tend to be ecological specialists. Invasive goats, pigs, and rats were introduced to Mona by its early inhabitants during the 1500s. Feral cats are also introduced, but their introduction time is currently not known. Feral goats and pigs are known to destroy habitat on Mona Island, while feral cats are predators of Mona Island's endemic species. The next potential threat we have is disease and climate change, and I have these two together because they have a synergistic relationship. The climate-linked epidemic hypothesis suggests declines are due to cause-effect relationships between pathogens and climate conditions. Amphibians infected with the amphibian chytrid fungus have difficulty rehydrating or absorbing water, which eventually leads to death. The added environmental stress of prolonged drought could increase mortality in amphibian populations infected with these chytrids. The change in temperature and humidity caused by climate change can also cause clumping of populations in humid areas, making them more vulnerable to disease. Now, at this time, BD doesn't appear to be an issue for E. monensis, but that does not mean it could not pose a threat to E. monensis in the future. Now on to tourism. The caves of Mona Island are the main attraction for tourists, with approximately 1,500 visitors annually, ranging from individual hunters to large groups of about 30 people who explore the caves for a variety of reasons. This research identifies the caves on Mona Island are probable breeding sites for E. monensis. There are times when activities of visitors inside of the caves are not monitored, resulting in deposits of trash inside of the cave chambers. Direct destruction from humans, including graffiti, has been documented inside the caves on Mona Island. Cueva Negra, where E. monensis do occur, in particular, has been heavily vandalized by tourists over the years. Humans can bring with them bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens, such as the amphibian chytrid fungus, or BD, which can enter the caves and potentially impact frog populations. Tourists can also bring environmental contaminants to Mona Island, primarily through insect repellent and sunscreen. Insect repellent, such as DEET, has been found to have a negative effect on amphibians and other non-target species. So now on to my management recommendations. Monitoring tourism impact is important to the protection of Mona Island's endemic species. Cueva Negra and Cueva Caballos are highly visited sites on Mona Island. Tour guides generally aim to keep visitors out of important microhabitats by adhering to the trail. However, there is evidence that not all visitors are always under the watchful eye of tour group leaders. Furthermore, not all tour groups and guides are trained to recognize sensitive areas, this can result in unintended harm to sensitive microhabitats and endemic species populations. Signage identifying known and potential E. monensis breeding habitat with clear explanations as to why visitors are not allowed in certain areas could be a useful tool at these cave sites. Warnings reminding visitors that social expectations are to not touch or move rocks, deposit trash or debris, or venture off of the trail inside of the cave should be placed at the cave entrance to further promote minimal human impact. Furthermore, pathogen mitigation protocols should be established and require all visitors of Mona Island to follow in order to reduce the spread of wildlife diseases such as the amphibian chytrid fungus. On to developing education and outreach initiatives. Through my experiences, I have observed that many people generally want to help minimize their impact on the environment and have an interest in the native biota. It's our job to provide the tools and materials they need to accomplish this task. Public awareness programs aimed at educating the public on the importance of preserving the delicate ecosystem and endemic species of Mona Island need to be increased. Brochures or pamphlets should be administered to all visitors of Mona Island, along with brief in-person trainings, providing an overview of the biodiversity found on the island and what visitors must do to lessen their impact. Workshops or courses presented by professionally trained biologists and ecologists should be required of all tour operators who take tour groups to the island for camping and adventure. And finally, further research is warranted. Understanding the natural history and behaviors of amphibians is important to conservation management decisions, particularly those that are currently determined to be data deficient, such as E. monensis. Research opportunities for E. monensis include determining the full distribution of E. monensis on Mona Island, continuing to conduct surveys within the known range of E. monensis, particularly in areas of high tourism, determining genetic variability and gene flow among E. monensis populations, evaluating the effect of invasive species on E. monensis populations, and finally, researching the long-term impacts of climate change on E. monensis populations.